Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about one of the greatest, if not the greatest story in all of Yu-Gi-Oh lore, and that is the story of the Duel Terminal. And this is all provided by Yu-Gi-Oh.wiki.com. So if you want to read where I am reading this off of, you can go ahead and check it out there. But we will be starting today with Duel History number 1, file number 1, the original war. In the Duel Terminal world, there were these tribes, it's the X-sabers, Mist Valleys, Flame Veils, Ice Barriers, and all of these tribes were constantly fighting. They were just basically there to fight, and the unfortunate truth was none were really stronger than the other. So all they would do is fight, 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 and never could grow stronger than the other, and inevitably the fight would never come to an end. Everything changed when the aliens invaded. These aliens were known as worms because the people on the dual terminal planet didn't really know how else to classify these creatures that they had seen, so they classified them as worms. The worms were invaders from out of space, and they were insanely strong. They were insanely powerful. Had numerous amounts of worms that they could use to overcome all of the tribes and inevitably take over the planet. Now, the Ice Barriers responded by releasing Brionac, the dragon of the Ice Barrier. He was an ancient dragon that had been sealed away for a very long time, along with two other dragons from the Ice Barriers. However, he was released when the worms arrived just to help out, fight back against the worms. The Flame Veils also had a pretty strong battler themselves. Flameveil Urquizaz, which I probably butchered that name, but he was another person who was very strong in fighting back the alien invaders known as the Worms. So what ended up happening was the Ice Barriers, X-sabers, and Mist Valley and Flameville realized that there was no possible way that they could defeat these alien worms on their own. So they decided to come together and create the Ally of Justice. The Ally of Justice basically were anti-worm weapons. Um, Side note, notice that all of the worm Yu-Gi-Oh cards are light monsters. And the reason that is relevant is because of how many of the Ally of Justice cards are anti-light cards. There's Ally of Justice Cycle Reader, which can remove from play two light monsters from an opponent's graveyard. There's another Ally of Justice Guard Hog. He gains 400 attack when he battles a light monsters. Ally of Justice Quarantine. It says neither player can special summon light monsters, so the Ally of Justice really were created to destroy the worms. The first major Ally of Justice that was used against the worm was Ally of Justice Catastor. Um, Ally of Justice Catastor had a huge impact on the battle. His impact was really, at the time, he was the most impactful person for the people defending their world against the alien invaders at the time. He was a complete game changer against the worms, but the worms were still very strong. Enter the Gen X. The Gen X were these power reactors that began to move against the worm invaders as well, realizing that as the dual terminal world that they lived on was beginning to come in trouble, they had to start changing the way they were making their machines and make them more closer to War Machine. Now, the dual terminal world was a world ridden with battles and war, but the Neterias lived in peace, but they were forced into combat because the worms forced them into combat. And the Neterias were led by Neteria Leodrake, and he was easily the best Neteria for them. He protected the Neteria forest where he and his friends lived, because a lot of the Neteria monsters, we've seen a lot of the Neteria monsters, they're not very strong. But Neteria Leodrake, he is very strong, and he used his strength and his fangs and claws to tear up the worm foe. Meanwhile, the Ally of Justice were beginning to change their mentality towards the worms. The ally mind decided that it would be a good idea to capture these worms and actually study them and analyze them. And they were furthering their strength of their ally of justice. Now, the Mist Valleys didn't really like that. So what happened is the Mist Valleys actually started to break from the ally of justice, which that was okay for them for a little bit because they had the Mist Valley Thunderlord, who was very strong and could protect them from the worms, even if they weren't in the ally of justice. Now, while all this was happening, something broke free, and that was the Fabled. So initially people thought the Fabled joined the battle to help protect the dual terminal world, but they had other things in mind. The Juric monsters helped fight against the worms and the Fabled because the Juric knew that while the worms were very strong, it had really barely affected them. But the Fabled, they were very wicked gods, and the Juric knew that they had to fight back, and they had to do something about it, because if they didn't, no one else will. And then came Fabled Leviathan. Fabled Leviathan was an insanely powerful creature at this time, and the people who fought against the Fabled found themselves increasingly fatigued, but the Fables weren't really getting fatigued. It's almost like the conflict fueled them to get them stronger and stronger. Then came the locomotion R Gen X. The Gen X reached the end of their self-improvement, and they got to a position where they created the R Gen X. They obtained a new power, and that allowed them to have capabilities that could have their combat be insanely stronger in battle with the worms. So while all this is happening, the Mist Valleys, they're breaking free and they're fighting everybody, including the worms and the Fabled. The Jurics are fighting against the Fabled to stop them. The Flame Veils are just trying to stay alive, and the Ally of Justice are reading more and more into the worms. The Ice Barriers decide it's time to release their second powerful dragon, Gungnir. When Gungnir was released, it destroyed thousands of its enemies. The Gungnir Ice Barrier dragon could destroy them and turn them into ice sculptures, and then they would just completely shatter. Mist Valley found themselves to get a little bit overwhelmed. They were fighting a war that should be fought with multiple tribes, and they were by themselves. The Dragoonity arrived. When the Dragoonity arrived, they seem to have passed down the secrets of using dragons in concert with themselves. They could combine their body and mind to fight against the worms and against the Fabled using dragons with them. People said they dwelled in the Dragon Ravine, and many people thought that was a myth, but obviously the arrival of the Dragoonity proved it to not be a myth. The battle against the worms felt like there was going to be an ending very, very soon. And that arrival happened when Worm Zero arrived. Worm Zero is reported to have consumed the other worms to grow stronger and stronger, swallowing everything, and it kills everything from merely moving. And the tribes couldn't handle it. They couldn't take it. Enter Ally of Justice, Decisive Armor. Decisive Armor arrived, and it seemed like it was the exact opposite of what the worms wanted to see. All that studying and that research that the Ally of Justice had done on the worms had finally paid off, and they used the Ally of Justice Decisive Armor to defeat Worm Zero. Meanwhile, the Fabled were now going slightly unchecked. The Fabled spent a lot of their time battling the worms and spending a lot of their energy battling the worms. They were also starting to destroy other tribes as well, which allowed the R Gen X to form with the Ally of Justice and form the Gen X Ally. And these new weapons could destroy the Fabled better than any weapons created before. All of a sudden, the Juric monsters decided it would be best if they turned themselves into meteors and attacked that way. But that is what created the Neo Flame Veils. Neo Flame Veils inevitably helped fight against the Fabled in hopes to bring end to their tyranny. However, due to the endless struggle and the world being basically decimated, and a last-ditch effort hoping and praying that this could end all wars, the Ice Bears released their third and final dragon, the dragon known as Trishula. However, the dragon Trishula did not go as the Ice Barriers had planned, and he froze the entire planet, causing time itself to come to a complete halt.